snow drifts across the endless white plains of Siberia, moving like slow ghosts beneath a pale, sunless sky. The year is 1989, a time when the Soviet Union is unraveling, when secrets buried in the ice are at risk of thawing. In a remote corner of Yakutia, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest settlement, a group of miners begins work on what's supposed to be an ordinary excavation site. But what they find will never make the papers. The official records list only an abandoned project due to technical difficulties. Nothing more. Yet those who were there, they whispered of something different, something ancient, impossible, and alive. The story begins with a man named Anatoly Sidorov, a foreman hardened by decades underground. He had worked every kind of mine, coal, nickel, gold, but this assignment was different. The Ministry of Geology had ordered a deep bore into the permafrost, a region where even the frost never melts. The goal, or so they were told, was to find new mineral deposits crucial to the collapsing Soviet economy. The operation was rushed. Supplies were late, communication lines unstable. But orders were orders, and the Siberian miners were used to working in silence, miles from anyone who might hear their screams. On the first day, the cold was unbearable. The wind cut like a blade. Equipment froze mid-operation, engines choking and dying in the thin air. The miners slept in metal containers heated by coal stoves, their breath forming ice on the walls. Anatoly kept a notebook, a habit he'd picked up during years of isolation. His first entry for that winter read simply, "Something's wrong with the ground. It hums at night." At first, no one paid attention. In the vastness of Siberia, strange sounds are common. Shifting ice, echoing wind, the groans of frozen earth. But this was different. The hum was rhythmic, almost mechanical, yet not quite. It came and went at precise intervals, like breathing. Weeks passed. The men grew restless. Their drills began hitting pockets of soft earth, strange given the depth of permafrost. The samples they retrieved were unlike anything they'd seen. Not soil, not stone, but a fibrous material that shimmered faintly when exposed to light. Scientists from Novosibirsk were dispatched, arriving quietly in military trucks. They didn't introduce themselves to the miners. They spoke only in coded phrases, recorded every measurement by hand, and took samples away in lead-sealed containers. Then came the collapse. It was a clear morning, one of those deceptive Siberian days when the light is so bright it burns through fog. The drilling platform had reached its target depth, over 12 kilometers below the surface. The bit struck something solid, then hollow. Moments later, the ground shuddered as if exhaling. The temperature dropped suddenly. Steam rose from the borehole, condensing into glittering ice crystals that floated like ash. Men stumbled back, shouting, as the instruments began to fail. Then the hum returned, deeper, closer, resonating through the metal scaffolding and into their bones. Anatoly described it later as a sound that made your teeth ache. The vibrations grew stronger, so intense that tools danced on the floor. The engineers tried to shut down the rig, but the control systems were unresponsive. It was as if something below was feeding power into the machines. Finally, a pressure gauge burst, sending a jet of gas into the air. Several men collapsed instantly, choking on the chemical stench. The rest fled into the snow. When they returned hours later, under orders from the site supervisor, the borehole was no longer steaming. Instead, a strange residue coated the surrounding ground. Translucent, viscous, and faintly glowing. One of the scientists collected a sample, holding it up to the light. For a brief moment, it pulsed, like a heartbeat. He dropped it immediately, but the substance didn't fall. It clung to his glove, stretching like skin before snapping back. That night, he locked himself in his cabin. By morning, he was gone. Only his notebook remained, filled with frantic notes and a single phrase written again and again: "It's listening." After that, everything changed. The miners reported hearing whispers from the hole, soft and distant, like voices carried through water. At first, they thought it was the wind, but the sounds began forming words. In Russian, then in languages none of them recognized. The ministry ordered radio silence. No one was to talk about it. A detachment of military personnel arrived within days, sealing the area and setting up perimeter guards. The miners were told they were being relocated for safety reasons. Most left without question. Anatoly, however, stayed behind, officially as a maintenance supervisor, unofficially because he couldn't let go of the mystery. In his final recorded entry, he wrote, The ground moves when you speak. It reacts to sound. When we whisper, it breathes. When we shout, it trembles. It wants something. The government classified everything under a new project name, Operation Moraz, meaning frost. Locals later spoke of helicopters arriving at night, of trucks carrying massive sealed containers, of guards who never returned from their posts. In nearby villages, people claimed they could feel tremors for weeks afterward. Dogs refused to go near the site. Even hunters, men who feared nothing, said the forest had grown silent, as if waiting. Then, abruptly, it was over. The mine was shut down. Official reports cited structural instability and hazardous geological anomalies. But years later, after the fall of the Soviet Union, fragments of documents began surfacing. One mentioned biomineral activity, another, acoustic resonance beneath permafrost strata. A final note, heavily redacted, simply read, "Containment successful, subject dormant." In the decades that followed, the site vanished from maps. The coordinates were erased, satellite imagery blurred. But rumors persisted, stories of lights under the ice, of faint vibrations that could still be felt during storms. Some said the hum continued long after the drills stopped, as if something beneath was still alive, waiting for the silence to end. When journalists tried to investigate in the early 2000s, they found nothing, only rusted machinery and scattered debris buried in snow. Yet one of them, a geologist named Irina Volkov, claimed to have recovered a piece of metal from the site unlike any known alloy. When analyzed, it emitted low-frequency vibrations, identical to those recorded during the original drilling. The lab later burned down in a power accident. Irina disappeared soon after. Her colleagues received anonymous calls advising them to stop digging, literal and otherwise. Today, the region remains closed, marked on government records as a hazardous environmental zone. No one is permitted entry, but satellite readings occasionally show thermal anomalies beneath the surface, brief pulses of heat forming circular patterns, like ripples spreading outward from a single point. Scientists call them subterranean echoes. Locals, with grim resignation, call them heartbeats. It's easy to dismiss this story as another Soviet-era myth, a relic of paranoia, Cold War secrecy, and human imagination fueled by isolation. Yet across the Arctic, similar legends exist. The Inuit tell of Tornarsuk, a great spirit that sleeps beneath the ice, angry when disturbed. The Yakut people speak of Abasi, shadow beings who dwell underground and feed on human fear. Even the Nenets have stories of the ground that remembers, a living earth that reacts when men dig too deep. Maybe, in the end, this was never just a Soviet secret. Maybe it was something older, something that has always been there, buried under miles of ice and silence, watching, listening, waiting for us to call it awake again. And perhaps that's why the government sealed it, not to hide what they found, but to protect the rest of us from it. Because some things in the dark are meant to stay buried.